good old 8-bit Sonic 2. Literally everyone I know that had a Game Gear owned this game, which makes sense since it was, packed in with the system. Naturally, that means lots of people have fond memories of it. Of course, nostalgia can make even the worst games seem better than they are, so is the game actually any good? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'll answer that question, but first, let's get a little background. Sonic 2 was developed by Aspect, and they would go on to make nearly every Sonic title for Sega's 8-bit machines. The Master System and Game Gear versions had very different release schedules, and that's where things get complicated. So here we go. Sonic 2 on the Master System came out in October of 1992, but only in PAL markets, Europe, Brazil, etc. It never officially saw release in the US or Japan. The Game Gear version came out in Europe in late October, with the US and Japanese releases coming a few weeks later. Now, because it beat the 16-bit Sonic 2 to market in most places, this game was technically the first appearance of Tails. The more you know. So if you've ever played a Sonic game in your life, you know how this one works. You run fast, you jump around, you collect some rings, it's as basic as the formula gets. It's pretty light on mechanics, it doesn't even have the spin dash, but that's to be expected given its age. You do get the occasional level gimmick in the form of a hang glider or a bubble you have to steer around, but beyond that, it's one of the simplest games in the franchise. The controls are decent enough, sometimes they're too touchy if you need to be precise, and sometimes they're too slippery if you're moving at speed, but on the whole, they get the job done. The levels themselves are well designed for the most part, with gimmicks being used sparingly but intelligently. Most of the acts are fairly short, which is good considering there aren't any checkpoints. If you die, you start all the way back at the beginning of the act, no matter how far you got. This can be a pain sometimes, but it hurts the most during the zone's third act and corresponding boss fight because there are no rings in these areas at all. If you screw up once, even if it wasn't your fault, sucks to suck, do it again. This means that the game can get really tough, but for all the wrong reasons. For one, the difficulty is all over the place. Most of the levels themselves aren't very challenging, but they are a bit inconsistent. One zone might be aggressively frustrating, then the next might be overly simple, filled with rings and extra lives like it's a tutorial or something. Speaking of frustration, there are two acts in particular that stand out as sore spots for me. One of them features pipe mazes that may drop you off into a pit and kill you purely because you picked the wrong way. Pretty unfair. The other makes you bounce around on springs with pretty much nothing else on screen. You're just falling out of the sky! Good luck, Sonic! That means that on your first attempt you have absolutely no idea where you're going or what's coming next. It's all guesswork and leaps of faith. Not so fun. The real difficulty, however, comes from the boss fights. These fights require a lot of trial and error to figure them out, which is a problem because remember, you die in one hit no matter what. By the time you nail down a strategy, you've probably lost all your lives, in which case it's game over and back to square one for you. Even a single ring would have encouraged experimentation and bravery, but since you're so vulnerable, I was always afraid to try something new because of how far the game would set me back. I know a lot of people are into that old school approach to challenge and difficulty, but I can't really say the same. Not anymore. Maybe I'm spoiled by modern games, and maybe I'm not, but either way, the game is relentlessly difficult. Unfortunately, these issues are compounded in the Game Gear version. Because of the screen size of the handheld, you have a much more limited view of what's around you, which means less time to react to hazards, and more frustration as a result. The smaller field of view makes some levels and boss fights an absolute nightmare, to the point where I'm surprised I got anywhere in this game as a kid. At any rate, the game looks pretty good, although arguably not as good as the original 8-bit Sonic did. Color palettes are tasteful, animation is decent, and the frame rate tends to hold up well. Music and sound effects are passable at best, though the game does get points for being the origin of the You Can Do Anything song from Sonic CD. Don't believe me? Take a listen. It's tough for any 8-bit game to go up against its 16-bit brethren, especially as far as graphics are concerned, but this version of Sonic 2 still manages to hold its own. And, well, that's about it, really. The game is fun and works well for what it is, though it's not immune to the occasional glitch or curious bit of oversight. What are you doing down there? It's not without its flaws, and some may argue it's downright unfair in certain respects, but it's a solid effort to replicate the thrills of a 16-bit Sonic game on systems that Sega could easily have ignored and left behind. So when you put it all together, Sonic 2 gets 3.5 stars out of 5 on the Master System, with the Game Gear version dropping to 3 because of its small screen size. It's a pretty good game, but it's also very difficult. If you like rising to a challenge and appreciating old-school game design, then this one was tailor-made for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you're in the mood for more retro reviews, we've looked at Sonic Labyrinth and Sonic Spinball in the past, so click those annotations right up there. The remixes in this video came from T. Lopes. He's a really talented musician. We featured him on the site before. If you haven't heard his stuff yet, you should definitely check it out. For more news, reviews, and information on all things Sonic and Sega, you know where to go. TSSZnews.com. See you next time.